We've got a really full schedule today, so it's great that you're here. We just wanted to put up as well the next one coming up, which is going to be next Tuesday, which is a Twitter class as well. And the next slide really shows you the full range of programming that we have. We're running these classes twice a week until November 9th. And the ones that have already gone by, we have captured them on YouTube and many of them on Facebook Live. They've been recorded as well, so you can catch up with that. We are sponsored by many organizations, including the SBA, and we are grant funded. So this webinar is brought to you by a collaboration of business advisory services in the Valley, including SCORE, the Valley Community Development Corporation, the Center for Women in Enterprise, Common Capital, the Franklin County CDC, and we are the Massachusetts Small Business Development Center with offices throughout the state, including offices that specialize in procurement technical assistance and the Export Center as well. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Heather Turner, who's done a number of these presentations for us. She's a phenomenal presenter.
Well, if you haven't started a Pinterest account up yet, it is extremely simple to do so. It walks you through every single step of the way. Plus, I'm going to be pointing out some additional places to go for help if you haven't set this up yet. And that can walk you through much, much better than I can from start to finish if you have any questions. I know a lot about Pinterest. I don't work for Pinterest, so I'm looking at it from a marketing perspective, a search engine optimization perspective, and also consumer and a business perspective. But in order to know absolutely everything about the bells and whistles, you need to go straight to the source, and I will tell you how to find that. Okay. Now, for those of you not familiar with Pinterest, Pinterest is very much like an old-fashioned bulletin board where you're pinning things to the wall, whether it's by or the gas station. It's very, very similar in terms of you're actually just taking imagery, or in some cases text, and you're just pinning them in place. Okay? Now this is a pin, and I'm going to start with kind of the basics. So those of you who have Pinterest already, please bear with me for just a moment. But for those who haven't had it, I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into this. Okay, so this is what they call a pin. And again, it's a visual image. Anything that is visual that you have on your computer or that you have on the web is something that can be created as an actual pin. This is your feed. So if you have Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, for example, when you go on your personal account, you're going to see anything that you follow in your personal stream, so also called a feed. And this is based on things that I have of interest that I've looked at on Pinterest, for example. So we like to garden, we like to build things like birdhouses and do it yourself. I also look at cooking and baking things. So these suggestions are based on things that I have pinned on my own personal and business accounts. Okay? And there's a question in here about personal account. Let me sign up with Google. Is this the better way, or if I should have created it in a different way? Okay. Now, when you sign up with a personal account, there is a setting in there. You don't have to sign up with another account or create a new account. You can convert it to a business account. And I'm going to actually go off topic for just a moment, because one of the questions that I get from a lot of people is, I've signed up as a personal account. I don't want to have two accounts, but I also don't want the things that I have pinned as a personal person showing on something business-like. Now, I'll go into a bit more something called secret boards near the end of the presentation, but that's something you can use the business account for personal use too, if you prefer to. So if you're already using it and you're comfortable with it, you don't necessarily need to go and create a new account. You can use your current one. Okay. Now, this is what a pinner is. So this is French Country Cottage, and this is one of those pins or the images that showed up in my own feed. So she took an image that she had taken a picture of, and she had posted it. So it showed up as a suggestion to me. These are what's called Pinterest boards. You know, it's interesting to me about Pinterest because people think Pinterest, oh, it's just for people that are cooking or people that, like to do-it-yourself crafts, or in a lot of cases, brides. If you do target the bridal industry, the wedding industry, Pinterest is probably the hottest commodity on the market. That has not changed at all. If anything, that has definitely increased. Because so many people are stuck at home, there has been an absolutely huge spike in Pinterest. And in watching some of the analytics of the accounts that I work with that do weddings, they normally have a huge amount of traffic, but just in the last couple of months, the interest specifically in wedding stuff has really, really gone through the roof. Okay. And there's a question in here about what format are the images in. JPEG is the best thing to post in here. You also can post videos as well. That's a fairly new feature that Pinterest has brought on just in the past, I think it's a year and a half. Okay. There is some image constraints, and I'll actually go through that as we go through this. But I like this from the perspective of this is a dentist, and they're actually getting a lot of incoming traffic from their Pinterest boards. And I'm using this particular one as an example is because people get stuck on Pinterest as being, oh, it's just for people buying things, or it's just for driving traffic to a website, or it's, again, for gardening or baking or do-it-yourself projects. But there's a lot of businesses using Pinterest and doing it well. And one of the primary reasons to use it is just because for this sole factor, it drives a huge amount of traffic to a website. Okay. Does Pinterest work with Vimeo? And, that's a good question. I think it does. I mean, you can pin videos from YouTube onto Pinterest, but I honestly have never tried to pin a video from Vimeo. And I'm going to go try this afterwards because I would want to find out if it works or not, but I would think it does. I can't actually see any reason that it would not. Okay. Now, this is what Pinterest looks like on like a desktop. And this is what it looks like on a cell phone. And I bring this up because when you do your Pinterest boards, you want to make sure that whatever you have online, make sure you look at it on your phone too, because you want to make sure if you're adding text to an image or you're adding photos to an image, that it's very clear on here. Because what looks good on the computer does not necessarily look good on your cell phone. And there's a question in here about copyright and people sharing in images they find on Facebook. I've had several images people have posted from my Facebook page. Okay. That's a great question, and I was going to talk about copyright a little bit later, but I'm going to address that one now because that's coming up. Now, when you have photos that is your own and people are sharing them, especially if they're filtering them from Facebook, which I think is not very nice of them, but I tend to think that most people don't do it. They don't do it in a mean way. They're not trying to copy things badly. They're just not thinking about copyright. I know that long before I ever got into the marketing industry and very much before social media, there was a lot of images out there on Google that not knowing much about copyright 15 years ago, I just thought, hey, I'll just download this and use it as my desktop background. I didn't know I was violating any copyright at the time. And a lot of people don't know anything about that. From the perspective of marketing, if you have people taking images from your website or your Facebook page, if you really want to use this and put a twist on it from the marketing perspective, use a tool like Canva, for example, or my own personal favorite, and I brought this up a couple times before on calls, there's a great free program out there for PCs called Fast Stone Photo Resizer, and you can watermark your pictures. So, in terms of branding, if you had photos, for example, that were being shared a lot and kind of filtered from whatever you were using, put your name on them, put your website address on them, because if they're going to share them, at least, hey, they're helping market and brand you. I know that I found people using photos from my own website, for example, unintentionally. And if it's something that really bothered me that much, I'd send them a polite email and then they'd take them down. Again, most people doing things like that really don't think about it. And there is a comment in here, it's out of enthusiasm, but not getting credit to me or whoever's work it is. And again, that does happen. And I think, again, it's more just people not thinking about it, but I think you could use that to your advantage. So just make sure you're branding your pictures. Okay, I hope that helped with that one a little bit. Okay. You know, if you have somebody using photos and they're ending up on Pinterest, for example, without your permission, you do have the ability to mark them as a copyright violation. You know, and I do recommend doing that if you find pictures out there that you know, for example, have been violating someone else's copyright. Please report that. If you yourself ever get an email from Pinterest that says one of your pins has been removed, you know, and most of the time I haven't run into anybody getting that because it's something that they uploaded that was someone else's. It means that your own account was following some gardening pinner, for example, and you repinned something that they had, and that was in violation of copyright. It just means that you're not getting in trouble, but the person that uploaded an image that was violating copyright did. They're not, Pinterest isn't going to come after you, they're just letting you know. Okay. And then the question is, how do you brand your pics? A good practice is to ask the owner if able to use. And yes, that is good practice to ask the owner if you're able to use it. But again, I would use a feature like canva.com. You know, Photoshop works. There's a lot of free photo editors out there where you can just put a byline on it. You can put your website on it. And then there's a comment in here, I've tried, but I can't get the ID number or the code. And Pam, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. So if you could clarify, that would be appreciated. Now, the whole point behind Pinterest is, one, it's, you know, it's visual. People are very, very visual. They don't read very much anymore. So think about when you're uploading pictures, think about the visual aspects of it. But most of the point behind Pinterest is to drive traffic to your website, or if you have a blog, for example, or your YouTube channel. The point is to drive traffic to wherever you have. So if you have an online store, for example, you have an e-commerce site, you could be using, you could be using Pinterest to drive traffic to your online e-commerce store. So, you know, in terms of one of the top social media channels out there to actually bring traffic from the social media channel to your website and actually generally to get them to convert, this is right up there, I would say, at the top. And Pam, if you want to email me afterwards, we can see if we can get that pin report sorted out for you, okay? Actually, I'm just going to go back here for a second. And in terms of photos, one of the things I do want you to think about is when you're uploading photos to here, think about how much detail is in this. So this particular photo, for example, if I'm looking at this, especially on my cell phone, there's enough imagery there where I can actually clearly see the product in the face. You know, if I go back to here, for example, and let me look for a good example of this. So here, for example, this is a good impression of a photo that has too much detail on it. So if you're thinking about using this for taking pictures of your property or your business, for example, when you're taking pictures to upload here and you want to try to take them vertically instead of horizontally, before you post it, I want you to take a really hard look at the image and see, does the detail in it get overwhelmed on here? Because again, it's going to look fantastic on the desktop computer because it's going to be big and bright and people can enlarge it. But a lot of people are looking on cell phones. So if there's too much detail in the pictures, most people won't even click into it. They're just going to see it in the feed go right by them because visually there's too much stimulus in it. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Now, there is a great website out there called Social Media Examiner. And every year they come out with the Social Media Marketing Report. And every year I get a copy of this. It's free. They also have some great emails that come out all the time. I highly recommend that you subscribe to it because anytime there's a change in any of the social media channels, you know, they let everybody know about it. They do podcasts, they do articles, they do videos. But it's one of the #1 places that I go. I mean, I have a bunch of other newsletters that I read on a daily basis about social media. But it talks about, you know, what's hot and what's not, and the new changes coming out. Pinterest is one of those nice channels. I'm going to call it nice because when they make a change, they're very good about letting you know. As a user, they'll email you with changes. They'll make sure that there's generally a pop-up or there's a notification at the top of the channel when something has been changed or added. They're one of the few social media channels that, unlike Facebook, they don't offer something and then take it away again. Anytime they make an improvement or an upgrade, I've never seen them actually remove an option, which for me is a plus. Facebook, for example, I kind of have a love-hate relationship on because they'll make some changes and then get people involved in it, and then they'll take it away, for example, or they'll test it on people, and you get all excited because you think there's something new on Facebook, but instead it's just them beta testing something. I wanted to bring this up as an example because this is a snapshot of 13, and you see Google Plus is still in there, and it's pretty highly used. So look at some of the other ones. Foursquare, for example, nobody really hears about Foursquare anymore. Podcasting, though, was just kind of coming into an emergence. And Pinterest is interesting to me because Pinterest actually came out in 2009. It really didn't start to pop for marketing until about 2012. So to me, this is interesting because this tracks everything. When you look at all of these social media usage channels side by side, you can really start to see the usage of all of these. So Facebook consistently every year has still been the big kahuna, but I just think this is interesting to compare all of these. So this is 41% of users used Pinterest in 2013, which is pretty high. But if you look at some of the other things, these were kind of, Instagram really hadn't even emerged really at that point yet. And there's the question in here, please give the name of the app again. The Canva.com and Fastone Photo Resizer, I think the two we were talking about, but I can always revisit that one if that's not what you were asking. Okay. Now this is the 2020 Social Media Examiner Social Media Report. This literally just came out last week. Now you see from here, there's a significant drop in what they say. From here, it's 41%, but also to 25%. But look at how much is gone. Instagram really, really took over a lot of the Pinterest values. But when you actually gauge this 25%, that is still a humongous number of people. And this data, even though this just got released, is something that they've actually been accumulating before this crisis hit. So it's not taking account this huge spike that we've seen in traffic since the coronavirus basically has forced a lot of people to go home and use social media a lot more. But I just wanted to kind of give you an example of the differences between these two. Again, Instagram wasn't even on the radar back then. Pinterest is still there and it's still pretty much going strong. 25% is actually a pretty big chunk of traffic. Okay. I'm just going to give you a second to just kind of look at this. I underlined a couple of things, and I underlined this particularly because it's over 300 million monthly active users. That's not the amount of people that actually use Pinterest and have accounts. Those are active users. So it's something like quadruple that number, and that's not even the people that have just started accounts and have just played with it a little bit. If you look at the number of Instagram users that have started an account and have never actually posted anything, I think that slightly influences why Instagram is still up near the top. Facebook does that too. It still says it's up near the top in terms of people that have accounts, but that's not actually gauging usage. Twitter is another example of that. I don't know how many people have started Twitter accounts. They advertise Twitter accounts on their websites, for example, but they haven't posted in years. So that doesn't fall into the active category. Okay. So just going to give you guys a quick look at this one. And do you have any questions while you're looking at this that I can help answer? Now, this is Evergreen Marketing. Now, Evergreen Marketing is something that once you've put it out there, it's out there forever. And Pinterest is, when I look at Google Analytics, Pinterest and YouTube primarily, and people's blogs fall into this category of evergreen marketing. So I know we have someone who, and I know Deb knows him, he's another innkeeper in Hudson Valley, for example. When you Google particular things about the Hudson Valley and Hudson Valley tourism, his Pinterest account comes up on the first page of Google, and this is searching for something not related to his business. So it highly influences Google and Bing and Yahoo and some of the other smaller search engines that are out there. And to me, this is humongous. Over 5% of referral traffic to websites comes from Pinterest if you have a Pinterest account. And there's a question in here, is promoted pin the same as a boosted post in Facebook, meaning is it paid for? Yes, it is. Promoted pins are paid advertising, and I am going to go over that in a couple of minutes. I actually find promoted pins and advertising on Pinterest much more worthwhile in terms of bang for your buck and exposure than boosted posts. That's a conversation I'll get into a little bit more in a few minutes. But one of the things that I really want to stress about Pinterest is it's not very hard. It does not have to be time consuming, and there really doesn't have to be any perfect way to do this. You know, if you can set aside 20 minutes a month to work on some Pinterest boards, that is all going to help your search engine and evergreen marketing traffic long term. You know, I've looked at Pinterest accounts that literally have not been updated in over a year. And while their traffic has dropped, it's still sending thousands of users a year to somebody's websites. And they didn't spend any money on this aside from a little bit of their time. You know, I mean, I think in terms of, you know, search engine optimization and getting traffic to get to your website or wherever you want to send them, this really is such a great medium to do that. Okay. So there's 3 different ways to get pins online. Up here, hopefully you can see this. This is a browser window, and right up here, this is something called a Pinterest pin. This installs on your browser bar, and it's integrated with pretty much every browser that I know of out there. I happen to use Google Chrome as my primary one. But basically, what happens is if I come across a web page, for example, that I want to pin a photo from, so I want to add a photo from that website to it, all I have to do is click on that little button and it's going to add it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I can also upload things, or I can save them from somewhere else. So for example, if I'm following Tony on Pinterest, for example, and Tony loves gardening, hopefully, I think he probably does like gardening, and he's talking about the perfect way to grow tomatoes, I might want to share or pin something that he posted or pinned. So think of it a lot like, you can't really do this on Instagram, but you can do it on Facebook, whether on a personal level or a business level, where you're sharing someone else's post. Pinning someone else's post is basically like sharing their post. So that content is moving over to your content. You're not taking it, you're redistributing it, if that makes sense. Right? Now, you don't have to ask people's permission to pin things, so you can basically pin something from any website. You could go to the CDC website and pin something. You could go to Score and pin something. You could go to my blog and pin something. I would be grateful if you did, just kidding. But you don't have to ask somebody's permission. What you do have to ask permission of is if you went to Tony's blog and you saw a great photo of those tomatoes, if you downloaded that and then uploaded it to your own Pinterest account, that would be a violation of copyright. If you just shared it from his account, you're not violating anything. Okay? I hope that was clear. So again, this is kind of a bigger version of this. Here is the Pinterest tab that I'm doing. Now, if you're just starting out on Pinterest, if you have a website, or if you're planning on redoing your website or doing a website for the first time, you're going to want to start out with your own content. So most businesses usually have at least 12 photographs on their website. In the case of some of our innkeepers that are on this call, they probably have several hundred of them. That would be the number one place that you would want to start, is pinning your own content. And if you have blog posts, and hopefully in your blog posts you have images, pinning each post. So, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but that's going to all help drive traffic to your own website. Now, in the case of something like this isn't my content. Why would it help me as a business if I am pinning other people's websites to my business board? Well, I work for Association of Lodging Professionals. One of the biggest questions that we've been getting is about cleaning, for example. So if I wanted to create a board that had a collection of the best cleaning articles that I could find out there on the web, I'm sharing other people's content that is of value. So from the perspective of a lodging facility, for example, you could be sharing content from area things to do. You could be sharing content from area restaurants. So if there are restaurants that have Pinterest boards, you could be sharing that information. From a business perspective, say you were a videographer, or we have someone on the call, for example, that does dog biscuits. So I'll use the dog biscuits as an example of this. If you had a product you were selling, your target market is people with dogs. So you may want to share nice photos that other people have done of cute looking dogs or attractive dogs or dogs doing agility training. You might want to share information about, how to keep ticks away from someone's yard, for example, so that their dogs, don't get ticks on them. You can use this as a resource. It's a lot like sharing other content on Facebook, for example, or Twitter, or any of the other ones, where you're sharing other people's content, you're repurposing their content, but you're also putting yourself out there as an expert. But the amount of content you can put it's all something to be creative with. So to use the dentist example, they had created a board with their staff on it. I've seen people create boards, and what they've done is they've actually taken pictures of guest books. I saw a restaurant last week that had actually had a written guest book, similar to how many lodging places have. And what they actually did was they took pictures of the people's nice little comments that people had done, and they created, because it was then a picture, they had created boards on their Pinterest account with the different nice comments that customers had written about their great hamburgers and the crunchy curly fries they had. So anything that's visual, or anything that can be created as a visual, can be content that can be used to be put out there. Now, and I know we have quite a few lodging people on here, so I'm going to bounce back to that, but you can also use this for any type of business. So if you were a lodging facility, for example, and maybe you had a bride, or maybe you had a family reunion coming in that needed information, or they were looking for things, you could send them a link to your Pinterest board or boards and say, hey, you're looking for places to go antiquing. Here's a selection visually of what's going on. If you were a videographer, for example, and somebody was looking for information about, how to set up the room so that when someone came to get interviewed, how it was supposed to be better, you can actually use this as a marketing tool and send them that information, and it's visual, so they'll actually absorb it better. Okay. And would you add testimonials given by clients? I would ask them, just like using things on your website, though. Ask them if the usage of their full name is okay with them. Otherwise I would block it out a little bit. What I have seen done commonly is people will just have the first name like Cindy C instead of, Cindy Kuman, for example. That's definitely allow it, because it's not an invasion of privacy at that point. Some people don't mind if you use their full name, but if you're going to use the full name, I would ask in advance. But testimonials given by clients, absolutely. I know people have taken screenshots of their TripAdvisor reviews and their Google reviews and used that as content too. So again, anything that's visual is pretty much fair game out there. Okay. So when I click on this little tab up here, and my apologies for people that have used Pinterest before, some of this, I'm going over things that you know already, but just to revisit this a little bit. It's going to give you a selection of images. These are all pulling it in from whatever images Pinterest can grab from that page. The reason I use this as an example, though, is sometimes you may not want, or you may want to pin multiple things. It just means you have to go back multiple times and repin those. It's all going to send them to the same link, though. Now, this is important. When you pin something, I would say write boards up if you haven't them. Make sure that you add information in here. By default, this is automatically going to pull in either the article or a blog post, or in some cases, the alternative text that this picture is. But if you want people to click on this, go in here and definitely edit this. It's still going to link back to the original place that you pinned it from. If you haven't done Pinterest for the first, like if you're doing it for the first time, or you're considering doing it for business and you really haven't really delved into that yet, what I would really do is, instead of just going on and miscellaneous creating a whole bunch of different boards, I'd actually take a piece of paper and start writing down some ideas. Because if you were a photographer, for example, or maybe you did dog biscuits, I would start writing down some categories. So, categories can be also split up for things. So I think I was using this as an example, when we talked recently, but to kind of explain this one out a little bit more. Say you have different types of dog biscuits. You have dog biscuits for small dogs, and you have dog biscuits for big dogs. Some of the biscuits are gluten-free. So you might want to create different types of boards for those categories. And some of the things that you're putting in there might cross over. So you might want a gluten-free biscuit in the gluten-free board, and you might want your gluten-free biscuit in the big dog board too. You're just extending that marketing out there. But when you create boards, it kind of gives you a little bit more visual image of, what are you going to put in there? What can you add to it? And also think about the order and the name that you're putting in there. Because all of this is searchable. So anytime you title your board something, anytime that you put information in here, anytime you name a pin, this is all contributing to the internal search in Pinterest. So, I just have a board, for example, named crafts. So if somebody was searching for crafts, this may or may not come up. But if they were searching for something like B&B related ideas, this was more likely to come up in Pinterest search when someone was searching for it specifically. Okay. Now, this is important. When you are uploading something for the first time, you want to make sure, and this is kind of just telling you that it will tell you the view image and video specs, which I'll touch on at the end too. But you're basically going to drag or drop an image or video, but it's going to say high quality JPEG images, less than 32 megabyte. Now, 32 megabyte is a humongous file. So depending on what your bandwidth is going to be, that's going to take a long time to load. I've seen the best resolution in terms of photos to be anywhere from about 2 megabyte to 5 megabyte. Which I find very, very interesting is that, if you uploaded a 5 megabyte photo to a website, it would decrease the load speed on your website because it's such a high file image, for example. But when you upload something that's really high resolution and high size on Pinterest, I actually have not seen it load any faster or slower than any of the other pictures. What I would be careful of is uploading low resolution images because, they're not going to look good on this, and they're definitely not going to look good on your website. And there's a question in here, how do I upload my own pics or videos? So if I'm going to go back to, let's see, right here. So when you're in Pinterest, you're going to see this little plus mark up here. And when you click on that, you're going to come up with this. And uploading an image or video is just like uploading it to email. So if you've ever sent a file or a picture through email, it's just like that. So when you click on add, it's going to go to your computer and you'll be able to search for whatever you have in there. Okay. Now this is important. When you're uploading pictures for the first time, you want to make sure you add a title to this. Tell everybody what your pin is about. And make sure, especially if you're trying to drive traffic to another source, so like your website or your e-commerce site or your Facebook page even, or YouTube channel or a blog, that destination link is in there. And you want to make sure that it actually works. The one thing that I've seen on a lot of Pinterest boards is people will put in a URL and they'll put in, janedoerestaurant.com, but that's actually not a link. That does not become clickable. So when you add a destination link, you need to make sure that you put in the HTTPS and the forward slashes. And if your site uses www, make sure you add that as a destination link. Realistically, the best way to do this is after you upload photos, just go back in and take a minute and check the link and make sure it works. I've also seen quite a few people misspell it. Realistically, if you're going through and uploading a whole bunch of photos at a time, I find the most kind of best use of my time is to open the website as a separate tab in my browser, and then I'll upload a photo, and then I'll just copy the link and I'll paste it in here. So I know, for example, it works and I don't have to retype it again. Okay. You also have this option here of publishing at a later date, which can be very, very helpful. Okay. Now, this is what a typical board looks like. This is my friend up in Andover. I can see Yvonne smiling right now because she's also friends with him. And so he does weddings, for example. And, we pin a lot of pictures that are his own photos, but the vast majority of things that we put on his Pinterest boards are bridal ideas. Okay. And there's a question in here. I implied earlier that a picture click automatically brings the user to wherever the pic came from. Do I understand this correctly? Yes. If you pin the picture from a website, it will automatically track back to that website unless you go in and change it. I would not recommend doing that because at that point you have violated copyright. Plus, it's not really helping anybody. If you're pinning something, for example, and then you redirect it to your website, you're also going to cause some confusion in the users because they can't find that image someplace else. Okay? I hope that clarified that. Okay. Now, this you see as a user, if I'm looking at someone else's account, I'm not going to see create board, but I am going to see the different types of things. Now, I'm just using weddings as an example because there's so many different types of categories, but you can use this again for any kind of business, whether you're a service business or whether you're a business that you're actually doing a product, for example. So, again, think about that list, draw that list out. And what I really recommend is do a little research on Pinterest, go stalk the competition. That's the best way to find what's out there. Look at what the users are doing, especially the ones that have a lot of traffic, and get some ideas. I've seen ideas all over the map that, just from businesses like dentists, for example. I've seen lawyers on Pinterest too, and I originally would have thought if you asked me a couple of years ago, what do lawyers do on Pinterest? But they're sharing lawyer jokes and they're driving traffic to their website. just as an example of what can you do on Pinterest. I really have yet to find a business actually that has not done it in an interesting way that had not occurred to me. Go poke around, see what other people in your industry is doing, not necessarily your direct competition, but if you sell energy drinks, go find out some other energy drinks online and go check out their boards, go check out what they're doing for ideas. I've seen so many creative examples of people using visual imagery to help market their business that, I'm sure there's new ideas out there, but there's such a wealth of information out there that just go and search for things. The one thing that I would recommend, if you're going to use Pinterest for marketing, is set a timer on your phone for this. I know that I'm one of those people that I tend to get very easily distracted, and I try not to use Pinterest too much because if I'm using it for business and I don't set my timer, I'll say I'm going to spend 5 or 10 minutes, for example, using Pinterest for business, and then I'll go, oh, look at that pretty birdhouse my grandson and my granddaughter would both look at, and I'm gone. So I've talked to people where I suggest use this for business, and unless I've clearly stated to that, make sure whatever time you're spending on this, you're using it specifically to market yourself, and don't beat yourself up if 2 hours later you're distracted by that really interesting recipe about, veggie burgers, because that does tend to happen on here. There's so much visual content on here, it does get distracting. But just please keep in mind, if you're going to use this for marketing, don't say, oh, well, I've spent 2 hours on Pinterest and I haven't gotten anything done. That's not Pinterest's fault. That's your own distraction rate. circle back and actually make the documentation of how much time did I actually use spending it for marketing. Okay. Then there's a question on here, how do I save the pins that I created in a business account that will be made public later on, not definite date? That's a good question. That's where we're going to talk about secret boards in a few minutes, and I think that's what will help a bit. Okay. So just to get into a little bit more personality with us, I mean, just as an example, Harry Potter weddings are huge. And this is, I brought this up as an example of this is how you can use something specifically to, market a business, whether it's photography, whether it's dog biscuits, whether it's weddings, for example. If you had a bride in this particular case that was interested in themed weddings, they can actually send this link to this Harry Potter board saying, hi, I know you were interested in Harry Potter weddings. By the way, if you're looking for some ideas, we've curated them for you. So it's an extra customer service value addition that you can use. But again, you can use that for any type of business. Again, go and look at what some of the other businesses out there are doing, because I think from a customer service perspective, you can get some really good ideas out there that you can use to pass on as an extension of your own customer service to help your customers with things. Because I like it from the perspective of it is so visual. Okay. So you also have the ability to break them into subsections. So each board has like mini boards off of it. So there are specific sections that you can split things up into. So if you were a photographer, for example, you can have a board just specifically for New Hampshire, but in that board as a subset, so think of subcategories of that, you could have one that was lakes, you could have ones of mountains, but you could also have separate boards for this. There is a limit on the number of boards you can have. I think it's about 500, which is a lot. And it's something like 200,000 pins. I have, in 15 years of working with people that are using Pinterest, I have only run into one person who has ever gone over that limit. And we call her the Mad Pinner. So, I mean, she's spent a lot of time on Pinterest. But I have never seen anybody else go to that extent. I think it would take a lot of usage to get up to that amount. Okay. Now you're going to see things on here when you have pins on here. You're going to see in your profile, you're going to see something that says promote, for example. You can also create pins from here too. And I think we will have some time. I'll go on Pinterest Live so you can actually see this. I know that some of you have Pinterest already, so you know what I'm talking about. But for those who have not really seen it before, I think that will help give more of a visual overview of some of the things that we're going over. Okay. Now this is, again, important. I had mentioned if you are blogging, please make sure you have images, and please make sure you are pinning each blog post. So anytime you publish a blog for the first time, make sure you're going up here and you're pinning that blog post. I know that when I started pinning blog posts a few years ago, my traffic to my blog, which has never been that low, but it more than quadrupled the amount of incoming traffic that I get. And I know that I'm getting incoming traffic from blog posts that I wrote years and years ago from the photos that I've pinned. So they're coming to my website, they're coming to my blog and sitting there and then reading the article that I've posted. So make sure you review that, because that will definitely help your search engine optimization. Okay. So again, when you pick something, it's going to pick a photo, especially if you're doing a blog post, for example. If you have multiple photos, for example, that you have in your blog post, please go in and repin or pin every single one that you have in there. Just don't just pin the primary photo. Make sure you go in and pin all of those. Okay. And again, this is choose a board. I use this as an example because this is the alt. This is the alt text of the website. It's a sign sitting in a shopping cart. So when I chose this for the first time, I would want to go in here and edit this and put a description in of what that was about. Because at sign sitting in a shopping cart doesn't really give a good example of what the blog post is about. Okay. And it will tell you save to your blog. Okay. So this tracks back to my website, for example. In this particular case, this tracks back to my blog post, but it only showed me that. When you go in to edit it, it will actually give you more specific information. Okay. Now, after you've pinned something for the first time, just because it's in there doesn't mean you can't go back to it. So if you were on a roll and you were just cruising through your website, adding all kinds of photos, you may just add a whole bunch of them at a time, but you may not want to, but you may want to go in later and tweak things. So just because it's in there doesn't mean you can't go in and you can't change the information. If you pin something and you want to change it, so say I pinned this pin to my blog, but I decided later on, hey, I don't want it to go to my blog, I want it to go to my image gallery, or I want it to go to my graphic design, I can go in and I can move it. So, don't get stuck on, I stuck it online, it's set. Nothing in Pinterest is uneditable, and you can always delete it. Comment and photo permissions, this is something you definitely want people to comment on it. I don't know why Pinterest gave the option of not having that commented on, but it is there. And I'm sure someone maybe had a bad issue with it at some point. But I like Pinterest because when they designed the system, I think they kind of overthought things, but they put in things that if you ever had the potential that you might need it, at least it's there. And allow people to upload photos. On most pins, people don't upload photos, but that's not true of all of them. There is something in here in Pinterest where it says on each personal account that you've tried this. So a lot of people will do this for do-it-yourself projects. They'll do it for things that they baked or gardened with or created. Is what they'll do is they'll say, yes, I've tried it, which is only apparent to them, but what they'll do is they'll actually upload a photo. So if you think of anything like Amazon, for example, or any of the food blogs out there like Epicurious or Food for Thought, you'll find a lot of the commentary in there will say, well, this recipe was great, but it needed a little more salt. And then people will take a photo of it and they'll upload it. Those are the types of pins that I have seen in there. I have seen on some travel accounts too, not so much bed and breakfast, but I have seen this on some hotels and resorts. I have seen people upload their travel photos on here too. From the perspective of you don't necessarily want to use those without their permission. But if you had someone, put a photo up there, go ahead and ask them, do we have permission to reprint this? Or you could take a screenshot and you could use the screenshot for marketing. Okay. So again, make sure you go in here. This section is the subsections. You don't necessarily have to use that. It doesn't necessarily impede search. I think from the perspective of you have so many different opportunities to create boards. If you're creating sections within things from a marketing perspective, I think it makes people have to dig more. And I don't necessarily know whether that's a good thing or not. I haven't really seen any pro arguments or con arguments that have really convinced me one way or the other to say you need to be putting things into sections. But do make sure that you edit the website to make sure it's going directly where you want, and make sure that you have that description in there. Now, the description and the title are important because these words that you put in here, these words that you put in the title, they really need to be, I wouldn't say keyword heavy, but keyword rich. So you want to make sure if you're talking about email marketing or you're talking about dog biscuits, any of those descriptors, think of it as, things that you would use in your website, for example, for search terms. Those are things that you would want to make sure that you added to your pins too. Okay. Now, this is important. This is available when you have business accounts. And again, if you started it out as a personal account, you can switch it over very, very easily to a business account. It's basically just sending a submit button in and they'll flip it over for you. This is interesting. I don't use Pinterest nearly as much as I would like to right now, just because I've been so busy. But this is a good example of, traffic. This is giving what people are looking for and related to the audience. Design interests. This gives you information. Think of this as Google Analytics for your website. This is Google Analytics for your Pinterest account. And I have some references near the end of this that will really teach you how to go into this in depth. I could probably spend literally about 2 hours going over through everything the analytics mean. And I think all of you would probably be asleep at the end of this, and I probably would be too. Okay. I did want to touch on this. When you're in Pinterest itself, you're going to see something that says promoted pins. So those are paid. Anybody with a business account can do promoted pins. There's different types of them. But if you happen to see this, so you might see something pop up in your feed that's completely unrelated to something that you're interested in. So just as to give you an example of this, things that I'm interested in are dogs, for example, cooking, do-it-yourself projects, cars. So those are the things that show up normally in the images that I look at on Pinterest. So I might see something like this, and maybe this was an image of slippers. And I don't think I've ever searched for slippers before in Pinterest. So I think, well, why would this be showing up in my feed? It's because whoever did the advertising for this, one of the keywords that they put in was crossing over with one of the interests that I had. So that's why it was showing up as something that's related. Think of it as kind of co-advertising, if you want to look at it that way, but it's a little bit more specific. Okay. So when you're in here in a business account, it's very easy to create an ad. I like Pinterest from the perspective of you can create ads. Most of the social media channels out there, you can create an ad, you can play around with the back end a little bit before you actually start it. So you can see what it looks, you can see previews of it. And there's a question in here, how do you say we switch from a personal to a business account? When you're in Pinterest itself, if you go up to the right-hand side, you're going to see a setting that says Edit. And if you go into Edit, there's going to be a tab in there that basically just says Switch over to business account. It's pretty easy to do. Okay. Creating an ad in here is very, very easy. I do like the fact that Pinterest is very, very well laid out from a visual perspective. Analytics is here, ads is here. It gives you the reporting, it gives you conversion tags. And I think if anybody is interested, that's probably something that we could spend a bit more time just specifically on advertising for things like Pinterest and Twitter. I know that Facebook advertising has been a hit on, but I don't know if a lot of these somewhat minor things have been. But those are all things that can take a while to go over and aren't particularly fun to talk about, but if you really want to dig into it more. But this does walk you through it very, very clearly. If you have a business account or you're switching over to a business account, just go in here and poke around. Go play around in this, because you're not going to get to the point where you're advertising something until it asks you to do your payment information, and that's near the end. So you can actually go through the whole process of setting up an ad, to seeing what it looks like, to seeing what all the options are like before actually adding a payment option and hitting go. So I really encourage you to go in here and test this. Just poke around in it. You can't click on anything wrong at this point because they don't have your payment information in the first place. And even when you do put it in, you have the option of stopping it at any time. I'd be happy to do a presentation on advertising on Pinterest. I personally think it's a better option than Facebook, especially if that is your target, is conversions and driving traffic. Ad costs there's a question in here about what are ad costs. I've seen ad costs go from anywhere from about $5 up to $50,000. It depends on what your marketing budget is. But I don't know if that was a wow or a wow. Okay, I'm just going to mute whoever you are. But that was appropriate timing in any case. But advertising can go, $5 isn't going to get you a huge amount of reach. It will tell you the spread. So when you put in your marketing budget, it will actually tell you, this is cost per click, CPC bid. And it'll tell you, I like this because it will tell you what other advertisers are bidding for. So you can either do the minimum or you can pay, what do you think you're going to compete with? I like this because this does have a lot of similarities to Google pay-per-click ads, where you can actually, it won't tell you specifics like who exactly is advertising for this, but it will give you some general ratios, and I think that's very helpful. Again, this is just some quick snapshots of what the ad options look like in here. Right now, obviously, picking locations outside of the United States, unless you're outside of the United States, probably is not the best option. But if you have international business at some point, I know that some clients that I've worked with in the past have a lot of clients come over from Germany, for example, so they actually had a really good ad campaign a few years ago. They were targeting people in Germany. Yeah, and I like this because it's specific. This is another big difference to me, especially in terms of advertising versus something like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. All of those, unfortunately, have a lot of fake accounts. The amount of fake accounts on Pinterest is minuscule, pretty much non-existent. So, like when you pay for a Facebook ad, for example, some of the money that you're spending on targeting is also reaching and hitting fake accounts. When you're advertising something on Pinterest, for example, and you're saying, okay, I want this to appear to, women in the Boston area, it's appearing to women in the Boston area. People don't tend to put in, at least the ones that I've never seen and I've never read about, they're not putting in information that's incorrect and wrong. And I did want to touch on that for a second too, because when Pinterest really first started out, it was pretty much all women using it. And the gender demographics for this have changed enormously. So, the last reporting that I saw was saying that it's not quite 50-50, but it's 45 men, 55% women, which is a huge increase. Just as an example of this, my husband loves Pinterest. He'll get on there for a couple of hours at night looking at do-it-yourself projects and cars. But so the ad demographics have definitely changed. Okay. So you can do video too as ads. And, I like the advertising perspective on here because you can do also something called ad carousels where you can add multiple pictures and it actually carousels through the ad spend, which is nice. So if instead of just one static picture, it's a series of pictures that's rotating. This is something that's another option that they've added a few years ago. This is on your main page, so on your main screen. This is not enabled by default, but you can pick 5 of the boards and you can have featured boards. So on your main account, you have your header, you have your business name, and then normally you would just have, boards that you had. In this particular case, you can set ones. So if you had a product to sell, for example, or a service that you wanted to feature, you could set it as one of the featured boards, and it would do the same thing as the ads. It would actually scroll through all of them. So if people are sitting on your Pinterest account, it would just scroll through those, and people wouldn't even have to necessarily click on anything to get to someone. They kind of see a slideshow of the different options that are out there. Okay. This is to go back to the analytics for a minute. And I just wanted to return to this because this is Pinterest last year, for example, when I had a little bit more time. I wasn't spending a huge amount of time pinning photos or uploading anything. But this is, look at the engagement, look at the audience, and this is pretty much not doing anything to the account. When you look at the fact that this is basically a month of traffic that I put very, very little usage into, those numbers are big. Okay. But when you really dive into the analytics, for example, you can change it to, paid and earned, other people's pins, content type. You can change it just like Google Analytics. You can change the range. So, it looks like here, in the end of September and the end of November, I probably did some more activity on here so the interest level spiked, but I still had quite a bit of traffic in between that and quite a bit of audience and engagements. And that's for something that I really wasn't doing anything on. Okay. So here's another one. I had added some, I really honestly haven't been on my own account for several months. And about 2 weeks ago now, I added some things. So you see the spike here. But again, you see this is just normal amount of traffic just for basically having some things that I put up there years ago in some cases. Okay. Now I want to talk about hashtags because that's something that I always get a comment on. No matter what social media channel we start talking about is, should we put hashtags in Pinterest? It doesn't hurt. People do search for hashtags in Pinterest, but one of the things that I found is, similar to some of the other social media channels, if you're searching for something like gardening, for example, you're going to come up with pretty similar, if not the same results, if somebody just typed in gardening versus hashtag gardening. I don't think it hurts to put it in. If you're using consistent hashtag yourself, like, so the name of your business, for example, or your location, I would be more inclined to put hashtags in that are specific. So if somebody searched for, hashtag, Jane Doe dog biscuits, for example, they'd be able to come to other pins that had that hashtag on it. So I think it's a little bit different perspective than some of the other social media channels out there in that regard. Okay. This is something that's an add-on that I personally like, and I think I should be getting a commission from Woobox at this point. This is something called Woobox. It's WOOBOX. If you have an Instagram account, if you have a YouTube channel, if you have a Pinterest account, basically this is an addition that you can put on for free onto your Facebook business page. There is a free version and a paid version. All you really need is the free version. And basically what it does is it integrates, there's an extra tab that shows up on your business page, and it integrates your board in here. So if you had an Instagram account, you could do the same thing. It's just one more way of like leveraging that kind of cross marketing for different social media channels. Okay. This is an example of you can pin videos. So pin videos from a website, pin videos from YouTube. I would highly recommend because it helps drive traffic to your YouTube channel. I know there was that question earlier about whether you can pin videos from Vimeo, and that I don't know, but I am going to find out because I'm curious about that. But I would think you can. Okay. This is where I was also talking about, sort of to use the dog biscuit reference again, pinning things on multiple boards. It used to be years ago, you could take a pin and you could pin it on one board, and then you could, within that pin, also pin it on another board. It changed that. But you can also go back. So if you're uploading a photo or you're repinning something from a website, make sure it's cross-indexed, if you want to call it that. So if you have things that should be on multiple boards, you have a product or service that should be in multiple categories, don't just add it in one category. Add it in any other category that you have. To use food just as probably one of the best examples of that, as a B&B, if you're doing breakfast, you might have a breakfast board, and then maybe you have another board that's eggs, and another board that's omelets, and another board that's eggs with cheese or vegetarian. Make sure that any product or service that is cross-applicable to anything is on multiple boards. Because, you might have somebody, look at support bed and breakfast, for example, and they might see something, but they might not see that content on something else. So the more you can cross over your marketing in this, the better. Okay. This is also important when you have a board. So this is an example of a board that I have. Look at how people visualize things. And I'm a visual person, and I know a lot of people, especially from a marketing perspective and the buyer's perspective, are visual. So look at it not just from on your computer, but look at it on this. When you look at people's eye tracking, they tend to go left. So if I was to go into this and say, okay, I want to take the imagery that was the most visually stimulating to a viewer, say I really wanted them to buy something or book something or use a service that I had. If I was going to take these images, for example, and reorder these to be specific to what people are looking for, I would probably like this image, for example, is quite busy. So is this one. This image and this image are quite clear, as is this one. But this one has a lot of color to it. So when I'm looking at this, my eyes are automatically drawn to this. If I was on this phone, though, I would have to scroll down multiple times to get to that image. So what I would probably want to do is organize this. So I'd hit organize, and then you can just drag and drop these. So I'd want to take this particular image and drag it up to the left. So this is going to be the first one that they see on the mobile phone and the first one that they're going to see directly to the left. Okay, does that make sense? Now this is something else. They redid this a couple of years ago. You used to be able to set all of the primary photos on here, but now you can at least set one primary photo. And this, again, think of this from the visual aspect. So, and I use this as an example because visually, if I'm looking at on a cell phone, it's very, very small. So I might want to take this image and make it the primary. So again, think of how people are looking at this. Look at your Pinterest account on a website or on the browser and look at it on a mobile phone. And then if you have images in here that have a lot of text, for example, or not popping, go in here. You can go in and click on this little pencil on here, edit your board, and hit change. And it will actually let you scroll through all of the photos that you have in there and then pick one that's going to pop. Okay. Okay. Now this is, I use this for two different reasons. This is what's called a secret board. This can be very, very helpful for a couple of reasons. So if you're transitioning from a personal account over to a business account, and you just want to have that one account, but again, you don't necessarily want to see things that you personally are interested in impacting your business, what you can do is you can switch the boards that you have over to secret. So you're the only person that can see them. You can still add pins to them. You can still move things. You can delete them. You can edit them. But nobody else except for you logged in can see them. You do have the ability to share them with other people, but they have to have a Pinterest account. I'm not going to go into that in depth because most people don't do that. And there's a question, how do you get to the secret board again? When you're in, let's see if I have a screenshot in here. Okay. When you're in here, when you're editing your board, there's a tab in here that says visibility, and it says keep this board secret. You can switch this back and forth at any time. So if you have boards that are public boards, as soon as you go into edit, you can just go in and keep this board secret, and then it will show up like this. So anything that has this little lock code in it is public only to yourself. The other reason I bring this up is as you start creating business boards for the first time, you're going to want to think of the visual aspect of this. Because if I went and I just miscellaneously created 15 or 20 or even 5 boards and there's no content on there, if people come to my business account for the first time and they see this, it doesn't look finished. So kind of best practices with Pinterest, especially if you're using it for business, is put at least 6 to 8 photos, put 6 to 8 pins in there first before you make it unsecret, because you want that board to at least look full, even if it doesn't have a lot of content in it. And there's a question, how do you save it without publishing it? When you have secret boards, you're still publishing your photos, but they're just not published publicly. I hope that kind of addressed that question. Okay. This is a question that I get a lot from people that are doing e-commerce. You might see it up here, and you'll probably see it in Pinterest. What is a rich pin? They're adding extra details. This does require a little bit of more work on the user's end, but this is free. So if you have e-commerce and you're using Pinterest, this will actually walk you through how to do this step by step. It's not difficult to do as long as you have access to the back end of your website. If you don't, if your web person charges you some money, that's going to cost you a little bit of money, hopefully not too much, for them to implement some code and implement some meta tags in the back end. But this will actually help with your marketing, especially if you're doing e-commerce. And this is free to use. So if you're doing any type of e-commerce site, this is actually, if you just go into the Pinterest help section and you Google rich pins, it will actually walk you through doing this literally step by step. This is something that you'll see. You do, again, need back-end access to your website. You claim your website, so there's going to be a little checkmark verification on your Pinterest account for a business account. And basically what this is doing is it's exporting a little bit of HTML code that you're putting in the back end of your website. And when you do that, you're going to get this little verified checkmark. I have had people ask me, do you have to do that? Does it help with search engine optimization? Does it help with Pinterest SEO? I've read some mixed things about that. I'm going to lean towards saying I think it's best recommended to do that because it's saying that you're a legitimate business. Whether it's impacting search engine optimization and impacting search on Pinterest, I haven't seen anything definitive that says yea or nay on that one. Okay. You do have the ability to also connect other accounts to this. So, for example, you can auto-publish latest Instagram posts to the boards below. Just keep in mind, this is not quite as easy as it seems at first glance. There's some back-end things that you need to do with Instagram on your phone. The first time I did it, I completely messed it up and I had to erase things and start completely from scratch. So just be aware if you start to integrate some of these other social media channels using this, it's not quite just click a button and it's done. There's some additional steps to walk through. And I'll be honest, if I had clearly followed the directions in the first time that they very clearly outlined to me, I probably wouldn't have an issue. So just be aware that if you do these, make sure you follow the steps that they recommend instead of just trying to wing it. I'll go from experience with that one. Okay. Now you do have some additional options. You do have the additional option of publishing things later. It'll ask you to set that date, and maybe that's what that question was in regards to earlier. These are some add-ons that are not part of Pinterest. This is one called Tailwind, where you can schedule your pins. This is $9.99 a month. Tailwind is one of the few applications out there that I found very, very user-friendly, both for Instagram and for Pinterest, but it is not free. They do have a free trial, which, if you're interested in checking it out, I would recommend doing a free trial. You get quite a few free posts for quite a bit of time, I think, in here for the free version before it asks you to upgrade. If it's something that you're going to heavily use, either Instagram or Pinterest, and you need those scheduling features, definitely check it out. I have not had any issues with them. I honestly have not been using it a huge amount of time, so I don't know a lot of past history on this, but I do know that I ran into an issue with publishing something because I had a setting wrong when I was playing with it recently, and they were very, very quick on getting back to me on customer service, which definitely goes well in my plus book for things. There's Hootsuite, which also has Pinterest integration. This is a personal preference. I'm not going to talk you out of this. There is a free version where it integrates with Pinterest. I'm just not a fan. I know people that love and adore Hootsuite. If you're going to look into scheduling options, what I would really recommend doing is creating accounts with all of these, playing around with the back end, playing around with the free trials, and then go with whichever one that you personally find the easiest. Because there is no wrong way to do this. Hootsuite has been around for many, many years and is a very reliable service. It's just not my personal favorite. So please take that into consideration. Okay. This is my personal favorite. This is Buffer. Buffer has free and paid. It doesn't say there's a free version right off the bat. And I'm actually going to go back to Hootsuite right off the bat. When you go to Hootsuite and you look at plans and pricing, you're not going to see free up here anywhere. You have to go all the way down to the bottom of their page, and there's a little tab that says free in order to come up with this. Hootsuite or Buffer, it's the same thing. This is down in small letters down here. This is 3 social accounts, 10 scheduled users at a time. Again, I personally like Buffer, but try them all out if you're going to do this and pick the one that you personally feel comfortable with. It's a lot like people asking me, well, which do-it-yourself web design, program out there do you like? I'm like, well, here's a bunch of the free options and some low-cost ones. I like these. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like that. Okay. Now, this is kind of the search bar in Pinterest. You can search by particulars. Just keep in mind when you search like New Hampshire, it's going to come up with all pins by default. But if you're looking for specifics, please make sure that you click down into this arrow because you're going to see a bunch of different options in here. So people is also accounts. So if you're looking for a business, you want to click on people to search for the business. But you can search for your pins, product pins, videos, and specifically for boards. So as you're playing around with the back end of here, do some search variations in here. And just again, make sure that if you're not finding what you're looking for right away, make sure you click this down a bit. Okay. This is some statistics in terms of what the standard pin is. They seem to have limited this a bit because years ago on Pinterest, when you're looking through your Pinterest feed, you'd see actually long pins. And it was very much encouraged for people to stitch photos together, and because it would basically take over the whole Pinterest board, whether it's on whether you're on your browser or on your phone. At some point, and I don't know exactly when, they disabled that. So now it's standardized. But it'll give you some specifics in here. So it'll say, 2 to 3 ratio or 1,000 by 1,500 pixels. In terms of sizing, On a standard screen, 1,000 pixels, if you can kind of admit it, like imagine this is about postcard size visually, but you want it like this. One of the things that I found is a lot of people that want to use Pinterest is all of their photos are horizontal rather than vertical. If you use some of the free photo editors out there, even Canva you can do it in. If you just pull up like what's called a Pinterest post and you insert a horizontal picture, if you make it this way, it'll turn it into horizontal, and then you can slide it back and forth so you can create an actual horizontal picture that will show up better in here.
So Heather, I have a few questions for you here in the Q&A. Anita, do you see them?
Yes, I sure do.
We have 11 questions open, so if you want to go through those, we can do that.
No, that'd be great. So some of them you've answered in chat as well, but the name of the website, again, to watermark or resize photos.
Okay, I did just put that into chat. If I didn't put it in publicly, I will put it in again, but it's called Fast Stone Photo Resizer.
Got it. And we had a question that we have someone whose photo that they put on Facebook has been used over and over again by other people. Is there something they can do to stop the use of the photo?
I guess with Facebook, is it being shared on public pages or private pages or both? Do we know? The one thing you can do when things are posted, you can report them as copyright violations. There should be on every post, and especially photo pictures, there's going to be, I think it's like 3 dots. If you hover over it, that should come up, and you can actually report it directly. And unfortunately, if it's been shared all over the web, the only way you're really going to end up finding it is, first of all, take that picture and watermark it. And anywhere that you find it, post a notification. Most people that are sharing photos, unfortunately, they don't really mean to do wrong. They just don't know. I've had my own photos shared illegally as well, and I've just sent a nice email to people or posted something to them saying, that's my photo, could you please remove it? That's a copyright violation. And I've never had a problem with it. You can go after people for copyright violations and take them to court over it, but I'll be honest, it's much better saying, if you'd like to share my photo and keep it up, at least give me a photo credit for it. And especially if you have a business website, it can be good advertising.
Okay, got it. And another one is that if you take photos on your phone, are you better off just uploading them from the phone, or should you put them on your computer and then put them back on? And you would answer that in chat, that if you're going to ask.
Well, yeah, I guess what I would say is, if you're one of those people that are used to doing this, I am not, my kids are, then yes, absolutely do that. For example, it takes me about 20 minutes to write a text. So to do a couple photos in Pinterest would probably take me about half an hour. So I would say it's really at your own comfort level using cell phones and texting. So if you're comfortable with it, do it that way. If you're a computer person, which would be me, I like to do it on a computer.
Got it. And we have someone asking about a fee for sales referrals. I'm not quite sure what that question is, actually.
Okay. Yeah, that's I'm not familiar with that for Pinterest. I know there's some external things that you can tie into Pinterest. I honestly don't know much about them other than just have heard of them on the radar. And I'm sure that there probably are some referral services that you could tie in for things, but I don't have enough information to actually speak intelligently on them at this point.
Okie doke. So everyone can see the tremendous use in the hospitality industry. What other businesses do you think benefit most from Pinterest accounts?
Oh gosh, I would say not all businesses, although I have actually seen businesses that if you had asked me 4 or 5 years ago if they should use Pinterest, I probably would have said not so much, but they're doing well on them, like dentists, for example. It really depends on how much content you have to share and how much content you can come up with. I have seen the most in terms of getting like direct sales from it, actually having an actual product to sell or a location to drive people to. In this particular case, when we did this original video, we had an awful lot of lodging properties on. That's why we geared it towards this. But, restaurants do very well on Pinterest, retail shops, both online and offline. If you have a craft, so potters, furniture makers, anybody with, I would say anybody with a product to sell will do well in general on Pinterest. But if you have services, I've also seen graphic designers, dentists as an example. I think from the perspective of if you have enough content that you're putting things on Instagram, you can also be on Pinterest and utilize it well. Plus you're getting some additional traffic from that. If most of the information that you have to share is going to be text-based, then Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter is more the direction that you should probably be steering into.
Great.
Okay.
Good. And this is another question. Can I load images on a hidden web page just as a repository and then change the destination link to another of my web pages?
When you upload a photo from scratch, you can direct it to any web page that you want to. If you're pinning it from a hidden web page, though, if it's password protected, it's not going to work. If it's a page that's just not listed publicly, so like if you had, 15 public menu pages on your website, and then you had one page that was public but not listed in the menu, yes, you could pin it through. But if somebody has to go through something that's gated, like a password, it won't work that way, no. I hope that answered that question.
I think that's great. And a question about the social media usage that you showed.
Mhm.
Were those based on US? Is that the US rather than a worldwide view of social media usage?
That is, as far as I know, that is actually like international usage. They do drill down in some of those reports specifically for, I've seen some reports that go into, US versus Canada, US versus UK. And then also, some reports, not those particular ones, will also drill down to, not so much states, but regions as well. But yeah, those are sort of global numbers.
Okay, good. Global numbers. Okay, great. And here we go. Shall I claim our website, etc., listed under a profile? Is that the best practice to claim
Yes.
your website?
Yes.
Got it. This person uses a pin board just
Mhm.
for hobbies, and how do they get started doing it for business, basically? Just
Well, I guess the question is, a lot of people have personal accounts and a lot of people have separate business accounts. There is the question for people that have been using them for personal accounts, do I want to not have two different accounts and switch it over to just be a business account? And you can certainly do either or. There's no wrong way to do it. If you're going to take a personal account and switch it over to a business account, it's just a couple of steps of going up to the right and then switching it literally over to a business account. It doesn't cost anything. It takes about 2 minutes to do. The only thing I think people would really need to take into consideration if they're going to do that is what content is on those boards already. Is that going to be applicable to the business? Are you going to mind if people see what your hobbies are? I mean, if it's something that you don't, absolutely go ahead and leave it. But I was on someone's personal account the other day that was thinking of transitioning it into into a business board, and there was a couple things on her board that, if somebody had seen them from a business aspect, might have raised a few kind of interesting eyebrows. You can certainly turn those boards into private boards, and then it doesn't matter at that point, which, if you do want to do it that way, is certainly an option.
And we have someone who works with in the STEM education category, and so
Mhm.
she's saying, what about like pinning figures or tables, graphics, things like that? Is that as impactful as using photographs?
It depends, I think, on the image itself. And I know I had brought this up at least once because I managed to pop on when I was talking about cell phone usage, is just keep in mind, if you are pinning or even uploading, as long as you own the content, things like graphs and imagery, just do a check, please, on your cell phone first and make sure that it's visible, because so many people are using cell phones to view things. And I have seen a lot of graphs. I mean, it's just like people showing PowerPoints and being cognizant of the fact that it looks good on a big screen, but not so much on a little screen. So if it's something that's a simple graph or a simple pie chart, absolutely. But if it's something with lots and lots of bells and whistles, you might want to reconsider that.
Okay, great, great, great. And the business account is free as
Mhm.
well.
Yep.
We've verified that. let me just see. Is there a smooth way to link your personal and business accounts if you want your customers to see them both?
To link them, no. What you can do, obviously, if you want to share that information, is just keep in mind social media is social, but people don't really look for it unless you tell them to look for it. So if you want to advertise both of them, if you have a website, have two Pinterest icons. One goes to your personal one goes to the business one. Put it on your business cards when we go back to in-person meetings. Put it into your email signature. Whether you want to specify one is personal, one is business, that's up to you. The one thing I don't think that was mentioned is Pinterest rolled this out fairly recently. It's called Pinterest Academy for Business. It is free. If you're using Pinterest already, what I'd really recommend is you just Google Pinterest Academy. It will come right up first in Google. Doesn't cost anything. It will really walk people through all of the steps of using Pinterest. And I actually went through the whole course, and there was a couple of the new features that I did not know about before, which was good for me to keep up to speed on. But I like it because they have small, very clear, easy to use snippets of information. And I had somebody that I was trying to explain Pinterest to a couple of weeks ago that I was not doing the best job with. English was not her first language. And I suggested she goes to this, and there was like the light bulb that went off, and she's, oh, wow, that's really clear. So I think from the perspective of they spent an awful lot of time and consideration developing this learning modules that people can go through, I highly encourage people to take advantage of it.
So this is a question, but it's kind of a bigger conversation. So visual, right? Pinterest.
Mm-hmm.
What are ways you could search for photos that would be really compelling to the audience? Because Google Images, and there's a lot of websites, they've got great photos, but it's all about the terms you use to search, right?
Right.
Can you give us some kind of really good ideas about, and this particular business is a virtual, they help people with, let's say, coaching or
Okay.
non-visual things, bookkeeping. What are there tricks that you use when you're looking for really compelling photos for a business for which the photos are not all that obvious? How do you go about it?
Well, I don't do Google search just because I don't want to get in trouble with copyright. If I'm using photos for my website or my blog, I buy them or I take them or I get permission from a photographer with credit to use. If I'm using them on social media, with the exception of Pinterest, unless it's like an adulterated image. So, for example, there's a great website out there, and there's some other good free photo ones, but there's one called Pixabay. And, Pixabay, I think, it's more of a question of morality at this point. They do release their photos for public commercial usage. But I think from the perspective of if you're going to use it to drive traffic on Pinterest, is to put it into something like canva.com and add some text to it and add some interesting things to it. If you're just using a photo to catch engagement on Twitter or Facebook, actually, that's a great question because this is a good example of it. We're looking for volunteers for one of the associations that I work with, and our board of directors wanted us to find, fun pictures of people volunteering and having fun. So what I start out with is some basic searches. So volunteers having fun, in Pixabay, for example. And then what I'll start to do is I'll see there's 300 photos that pop up, and I might see 2 that match what I'm looking for. So what I'll do is most photography sites will have keywords that the photographers have put in. So what I'll do is I'll capture those keywords, and then I'll go back and I'll search those keywords, because it's kind of like a breadcrumb trail. You start to find, as you finesse what you're looking for, finding some more creative ones. I guess here's another example. I was helping somebody with an educational project last year, and she was looking for educational fantasy photos, if that makes sense. Not fantasy per se, but people reading books and dreaming of crazy amazing things. And we started out on this path of the and you've probably seen it a lot on the web of these bookshelves coming up and there's sky coming up above it. And so we started with some photos like that, and we backtracked, and we ended up finding literally hundreds and hundreds of pictures that were sort of related to that. Somebody standing in a suitcase reading a book with the elephant coming up. So once you start to find that grouping that you're looking for, it'll start to expand into some other things.
And where are you finding the tags from the photos? When you said you went into all those photos and there were a couple that appeal to, where are you finding tags?
Let me see if I can bring up a couple of websites, because I think if I actually show some people, that actually might help. So if you would just give me 2 seconds. And is there another question that I can answer while I'm pulling some information up?
So yes, there's someone who has a dog bag and apparel business for both
Okay.
people and dogs.
Okay.
And so should all the boards be related to the business is really the question.
That's a tough one. I mean, again, it's, think of what people are viewing. So, I mean, if you have a dog related business, obviously things like cute dogs would be, fun to see. Things like other dog products you like, it should have some tenuous relationship to the business. It doesn't necessarily have to be directly related to the business, but there should be some sort of like even vague connection to it. I wouldn't suggest, going completely off the ball and talking about, lizards, for example. Because that's just it. That it's not going to have people, when they're viewing it, kind of go like, okay, here's all these dog things and things related to the business, and then all of their sudden there's a board or two about eggs Benedict. That's just from the consumer's perspective, that's just not going to make as much sense.
But there could be some pins around, man's best friend, or
Mhm.
photos of people in love with their dogs, right?
Yeah.
So it's not all about the product you're selling or the service, but
Mhm.
you're romancing your market, which is the dogs.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Okay. So do I have the ability to share?
you should.
Let's see. Share screen. Here we go. Okay. So this is Pixabay. I use this quite a bit. And on Pixabay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. On Pixabay, if you go down to the right-hand side, you're going to see category nature landscapes. But also look down below this. So there's, sailing boats. So these are some of the keywords that they've been putting in for this. And you can also just click on these, which is very helpful. So you can click on the categories, and most of the photo sites have this. This is dreamstime.com, which I use a lot. You can get very, very good, inexpensive stock photos that are totally legal for about $1.50 for low resolution, for web resolution. But it's the same thing. So to use a volunteer example of this, if I scroll down to the bottom, you see some of the keywords that they've put in. So some of these other ones can help give you an idea of what you're looking for. Okay.
That's great.
Does that help a bit?
That's terrific. Thank you. And it's great to have that example. Thank you. Well, I think we've answered all the questions. Let me just take one more peek. I think, yeah, we've answered all the questions, Heather.
Okay. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Heather. You're a wealth of information. You really are. We thank you so much for being here. And this is going to be recorded, and we'll send out the recording link so you can watch it again. And thank you all. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.